you. It's like I have my own rave going on. Okay, well, hello and good morning. As introduced, my name is Gabriella Kusz. I am a co-founder and I sit on the board of directors of the Global Digital Asset and Cryptocurrency Association. We are a global voluntary self-regulatory association, which is a mouthful. And we'll go into exactly what that is and how it helps to solve some of the challenges. Oh, thank you. And how it helps to solve some of the issues that we see around cross-border engagement, around helping to steward and shepherd the development of the digital asset industry, and also giving some level of comfort to many of you who own businesses in the digital asset space and are seeking to understand and navigate a high degree of legal ambiguity and complexity, both here at home as well as abroad. No, it says it's on. It's all right. I can just say progress slide if you think that's better. It's okay. Okay. It's always fun to have technology issues at a technology conference. Really helps to solidify you as an expert. But anyway, today I'm going to go over a few key areas. The first is just to kind of level set. You know, a lot of us come from different backgrounds, different levels of understanding when it comes to the digital asset space. I'm going to sort of set the scene when we talk about what I mean about jurisdictional issues, how and in what way those complicate your business, cost you money, and then also minimize what we're trying to do, which is to help steward responsible innovation. I'm going to talk a little bit about navigating today's issues, and I will take a crystal ball out and give a little bit of perspective on where I think this is going in terms of navigating those issues. And then I want to focus as well on some of the really amazing work that the Global DCA in support and partnership with the Government Blockchain Association is doing to try and bring together global regulators and to focus efforts on knowledge sharing, lessons learned, and helping all of us move forward successfully around the world in this industry. And then, of course, questions. So next slide. So just to kind of start off, the digital asset industry is significant and growing. We're now at about $2 to $3 trillion, depending on which day we're at and the valuation. And you're looking at about an 880% increase in peer-to-peer engagement and advancement of the industry. It's a very global industry. There are countries that have taken a bit more of a progressive stance. They've leveraged and have focused on building out the industry for a particular use area. But generally speaking, every country around the world is at some stage of engagement in this space. And we see that that is reflected. So, for example, in the Chainalysis, geography of cryptocurrency report that they did for 2021, you can see that there is adoption, in a number of different jurisdictions. It's not regional. It's not based on level of development, but really kind of a broad swath. So this is very inherently a global issue. I think it's also important to recognize that these are very high growth firms. And for those who may be focusing on this from a regulator's seat, and have a dual mandate where you're both trying to shepherd consumer protection as well as seeking to grow and advance economic growth and development in your countries, it's very important to make sure that you're balancing those two aspects and that you take into consideration what that means in terms of positioning, creating jobs for you and your people, and broader economic and social prosperity. So as an industry, if I were to use a few words, sometimes I think it's good to just kind of identify those keywords and then plug in and talk a bit more in depth on what we're seeing. So I think the first piece is that this is still a very evolving industry. And in particular, when it comes to legal and regulatory approaches around the world, it seems that every country, everywhere, is at a similar point in reckoning, meaning that they are coming to terms with how and in what way, and we've talked about this a little bit in earlier presentations, how do you effectively regulate something that is decentralized? Because historically, traditionally, the regulation has been based on a centralized focus. There's a centralized regulator and some sort of a centralized entity to which you can point and target that type of a focus. If you're working in a peer-to-peer system and you have distribution, you have decentralization, how are you going to mimic or create a similar level of regulatory coverage for your people, for your country, without that same level of one-on-one? So again, someone, somewhere in one country is responsible, and we can go to that person, that company, if there's an issue, and our regulations, our laws can be targeted to that entity. This is, I think, both a philosophical as well as a regulatory question, and it's one that, as I mentioned, countries in Africa, Botswana, Uganda, Nigeria, countries in Asia, Singapore, India, in the US, and even in Latin America and Caribbean, Middle East as well, you're seeing each of these different regulators embarking on a similar sort of a quest for trying to solve this question of how and in what way they're going to maintain that dual mandate while acting in a very inherently decentralized field. In terms of what approach they're taking, traditional in the first instance. And I think that you try to work through the systems that you have already. We all know how long it takes many times to create new legislation, to stand up and to train, hire, and support the creation of a new regulatory entity. So it's very natural, I think, and from a perspective of, in a first instance, looking at trying to, fit that into what exists already. However, one of the challenges here is that the reality is that this isn't something that naturally lends itself to existing structures. And it maybe most importantly misses the fact that this isn't just a new technology, but rather it's the beginning of a transformation of what we're seeing with regards to the financial sector and the evolution of the global financial system. And so in that respect, those jurisdictions that are appropriately recognizing that are bringing together, for example, working groups, or creating a whole of government approach, or focusing to try and, not only regulate, but to a certain extent to reimagine what it means to regulate. And I don't mean that, just kiddingly, but to really think if the goal of the regulatory entity is to protect consumers at the far end, then that's the impact you're trying to drive. The regulatory reporting, the inspections, the oversight, those are the outputs in that system. But now we have to kind of, in some ways, refocus, reposition, and ensure that if we are now having to have disruption and some sort of again, disintermediation, even at like a regulatory institutional level, what does that mean for how and in what way you're going to continue to fulfill your mandate and serve the public interest? Again, I've talked about the fact that, it is, and we'll go into detail on why and how this has to be viewed globally. But today, what we're seeing still is that a lot of the regulations are being very much bound by national borders, or jurisdictional borders, I should say. And the last piece is that, again, you're dealing with something that is emerging, it's evolving. So creating a legal and regulatory framework that fits this space, it's trying to do that on top of a moving target. And that's a moving target that is moving extremely quickly, that requires a high degree of expertise and training, and that, again, is extremely global because it was built to facilitate cross-border engagement, and it very naturally lends itself to transcending those borders. Thanks. So I talked a little bit about the fact that, don't feel left out if you're watching this from an international regulatory authority. You're trying to figure out how and in what way you're going to address this. Welcome to the club, kind of. Everybody's at that same sort of a starting point. You know, whether you're in India, like I said, you're in the UK, you're in the European Union, everybody's trying to understand how and in what way they need to shift and change and in some ways transform in order to mimic and mirror the underlying industry that they're responsible for overseeing. I think it's important also to recognize that you have sort of a, you know, additional layer of complexity for those of us that come from jurisdictions that are federated. So if you have, you know, subnational divisions in addition to, you know, your national level perspective, policy, regulations that you're undertaking, you have a whole nother element of coordination, harmonization, and potentially divisional jurisdictional arbitrage that may be taking place that you either need to overcome or to leverage to the benefit of the whole of your nation. I think what you're going to see is, yes, in some cases, there are races to the bottom in the sense that certain jurisdictions may be trying to evade or to minimize, let's say, any and all regulatory requirements. But I think that it also offers an opportunity for a race to the top. And what I mean about that is that this is a potential reset and an opportunity for, again, those countries that are looking to drive and attract businesses that sincerely have a high degree of resiliency and longevity, and their focus is not only on, you know, today's dollar, but building a long-term business and contributing to directing the growth of the industry. That's the kind of a firm that you want moving into your jurisdiction. That's the kind of a firm that you would like to help shepherd and align with your broader national economic growth and job creation priorities. And this is the type of, you know, member that we at the Global DCA are seeking to build and support. And I think as well, you know, the type of a relationship that you would like to have and the person that you'd like to have sitting across the table from you. I'll also talk a little bit about, you know, just briefly, because we could go through every and any different type of legal tradition or, you know, regulatory structure, and a lot of that is impacted based on historical ties, okay, legal traditions, code, common law. But I think one of the key pieces just to focus on as well is some of the benefits or potential advantages to those who are coming from a unified regulatory framework versus one that's a little bit more disparate. Because again, if you're talking about points within the framework that you're trying to devise, each and every point that is an area for additional layers of complexity, right? And all of that needs to be managed in order to ensure that as a nation, you're positioning yourself for that broader growth, global economic positioning, and opportunity. So this is where we take out the crystal ball and I say, you know, what do we think we're going to see in the short term and what do we think we're going to see in the longer term, right? So I think in the short term, again, we're going to, and it's not wrong, it's kind of a first step, is looking at what exists today, in what way can we leverage the, you know, systems, the legal and regulatory structure, how can it maybe be shaped in order to fit sort of the early first stage of development that we're seeing in the industry. Because again, this is still the first inning of where this is going to go in terms of the growth and development of the global digital economy. I think the next phase, though, is going to be a gradual realization in each and every country and each and every working group that this is so much more than just Bitcoin and Ethereum. And we're still kind of at that point where, you know, the blinders haven't come off to the broadness and the breadth of all and everything that this will transform. And I think once that happens, you're going to have a greater degree of understanding about how and why global engagement, communication, dialogue, and cooperation is going to be important. And like I said, I think in the future, you're going to see a very strong interest and a very important role for civil society organizations, nonprofits, associations, and even international organizations that exist today and facilitate a lot of that ongoing engagement around traditional finance. And the last piece I'll say is that there's going to be an increased need for standard setting. And we'll get into that as well. But, you know, To a certain degree, yes, there's benefits around being able to select a jurisdiction that has certain advantages that they've put forward to enhance the attractiveness of basing operations there, of building and growing. But if you're a global business and you are operating in a number of different jurisdictions, a number of different states, at a certain point, it actually becomes a detraction because you're trying to do business across these areas. And it's, in order to understand the additional costs that's associated with operating, navigating, understanding the different legal and regulatory frameworks, all of those are costs that hit your bottom line. And if you're looking to try and create a technology that works cross-border, you also have to be looking at helping to shape and support the elaboration of a legal and regulatory framework that similarly mimics, follows, and helps to create almost a runway where the industry can take off, okay? So what is the Global Digital Asset and Cryptocurrency Association doing to address this? So as I said, we are a very long descriptive name of a global voluntary self-regulatory association. And really what that means is that, our focus is in the first instance on standard setting. So we lend our voice to existing global standard setting frameworks. These have high degrees of due process, they're transparent, and they have a high level of market recognition and integrity. Where and when there are gaps, this is when we seek to identify those issue areas, create standards for our membership and for the broader industry as a whole, and then also provide detailed guidance, because a standard is great, a principles-based standard is great, but at the end of the day, somebody has to take that and implement it in practice. And that's usually the point at which you lose people, and you risk losing all the benefits of an international level of harmonization if you can't translate that adoption into implementation. The next piece that we focus on is education. And this is around ensuring that, when we talk about protecting, consumers and investors, ensuring that people that hold a role or a position in advising on how and in what way to create a responsible mix, leveraging digital assets, is going to be increasingly important. And so from our side, we do have a heavy focus, including today's presentation and engagement, but also just engaging in a number of different free, open to the public opportunities to share industry knowledge and understanding. And then the last piece that we focus on is advocacy. And in that space, we take it from a very global perspective, meaning that we engage and provide input and perspective in order to help support elected leaders in making informed policy decisions. And to this extent, we do that both here in the US, but also around the world. And from our side, it's through creating research reports that are publicly available, or through lending our insight through external organizations that are doing research on the industry, facilitating survey participation, so on and so forth. Today we have 60+ member firms. Those include small, medium, as well as large businesses. And we have 15 memorandums of understanding with other national level self-regulatory movements. And the importance of that is that it creates both an opportunity for us to knowledge share, to understand, and to gain insight into what some of the trends or issues or conditions are in those markets, as well as to have really crucial insight on what's coming down the line. And because again, we're dealing with a very global industry, and being able to have those relationships and to be able to understand what's coming next is important to ensuring that we're appropriately positioning strategically and helping to support the development of the industry for the benefit of members, stakeholders, and the public interest. So that brings me to one of my favorite points, which relates to this amazing piece of cooperation that we are doing with the Government Blockchain Association. As I mentioned, we do have a sincere commitment to the public interest, and in that, we believe that it's part of our responsibility to share a bit about what we see in the industry, what are some key issue areas, what are challenges, and what are opportunities. And I think in this respect, we've come together. I co-chair our regulator working group. It is open to all government regulatory representatives. It's an opportunity to kind of come together as a community of practice and to, as I've said, share knowledge, to build bridges between and amongst, different regulatory bodies. And it's really just a point of networking. Independently, they may go off, engage. There may be potentials for twinning, so meaning where one regulator would share their, process, their program for developing, evolving with another regulator, right? But the idea is that, especially given the global nature of this, it's important from, I think, a global risk perspective to ensure that there's active cooperation and dialogue, and that that's being undertaken in some ways formally and in other ways informally. So that's just a little bit about it. We treat it very much like a bit of open office hours. So if you are interested, please feel free to visit the GBA website, sign on as a member, and then you can opt to participate in the working group. And so that's it. I apologize for taking so long. I know I tend to speak at length, but at this point I'd like to kind of open it up. And if there's any broad questions that people have, or, please feel free. I'm happy to engage and we can have a nice talk. Yeah, please. Oh, no.
So what steps would you recommend to a company that's going to work cross-border in multiple countries to kind of prepare or inoculate yourself against regulatory problems? Often the advice is to talk to the regulators, but that's the U.S. regulators for us, but what do you do? How do you talk to all of them?
So I think there's a few things. One is, I always tell people there's a lot, depending on how many jurisdictions you're working across and where and, what locales your business is going to touch, there's always an opportunity to engage at a national level with an industry association or with one of, for example, our MOU partners, right? And that can give you kind of a degree of understanding about what some of the challenges are that businesses perhaps similar to yours may be facing. It will also give you, to a certain degree, a soft landing into that country because you're instantly connected into a network. You have a group of industry peers that can support you. So I think that, at this point, because things are still quite disparate, those would be some of the key ways. Of course, hiring good legal counsel is always important as well. And I think, depending on the jurisdiction, a lot of regulators are very eager to sit down and to work with you and to learn about your business. And, I can speak to just some of those that are part of our working group or in this space. They're really trying to ensure that they have the most up-to-date information and that they're fulfilling their, legal mandate, which is typically dual-focused, right? So it is economic growth and it's also consumer protection. And we always joke that, if you wanted ultimate consumer protection, you would never approve any product ever because then everyone would always be 100% protected. But I think, in that respect, as I've said, there is a willingness on many global jurisdictional regulators to sit down and to learn a bit about what your business is and to see if there's a way, I think, at least initially, to give insight as to how and in what way you can build your business in a compliant manner, right? So, legal support, association engagement, and then I would say, talk on the ground and get a feel for the degree of openness and engagement that that regulator is willing to have, especially with this emerging industry.
My name's Preston Fisher. I'm with the FTI Consulting. One of the issues that pops up in our disputes and investigation practice quite frequently is where a digital asset is domiciled.
Yeah.
This kind of exasperates that issue of centralized standards that are traditional, meeting decentralized assets, trying to ascertain where the responsibility is, where the authority is, whether we're talking about an organization or an individual. If you could provide some comment on that, that'd be great.
Sure. So I will say Yes, 100%. That is an extremely important issue. And I think it goes to the heart of some of what I've covered, but I'll elaborate a little bit further and just say that, again, I think many times when we talk about digital assets, there's a focus or a hyper focus on things like Bitcoin and Ethereum. And it misses this much broader picture, which is the fact that we're moving towards a decentralized system in the financial sector. And if you are, working at a regulator, you have to recognize that transition and that transformation, because ultimately, in order to fulfill your responsibility for ensuring and promoting consumer investor protection and the public interest, you need to then devise, and like I say, I don't say it to be coy or cheeky, but you almost have to reimagine what it means when there's not this centralized focal point where you can put your regulatory effort and energy, right? And so how are you now going to, and I talk a lot about this from a standpoint of transitioning, it's not this whack-a-mole, rough approach or adversarial relationship that you need to have. It's more along the lines of being almost like a gardener and shaping the growth of an industry overall, recognizing that you're not going to necessarily have a centralized focal point, but now it's almost like community management to a certain degree, right? And I know people will laugh and but you're shaking your head, and I think we both know that. And so I think that it's that philosophical shift that has to take place. It's the recognition that this isn't just about a new financial product that needs to be regulated. It's about an overarching shift that we're seeing, which has been spurred by technology, which was definitely foreseen when we talk about the fourth industrial revolution and the digital economy. But how and in what way are you going to shift and shape into that new role? Because ultimately, if you're able to do that, you will be much better able to fulfill your mandate. You'll be able to help guide the development of the industry, and all the benefits of that come through, they'll be able to accrue to you and your people. And at the end of the day, I think most people who are engaged in this industry, yes, from a potential profit-seeking and perspective, but there is a lot around the belief system that this entails. And it means about greater economic opportunity, greater social opportunity, and I think greater overall opportunity for people all over the world. Thanks. Yeah, please.
Mark Wasser, GBA again. It seems as if the best initial global initiative is the one for the 15% corporate taxes across the board. Do you think that has any chance of passing? And is there some way to maybe make it so that it does?
So I think there's a few pieces to that. One is that, yes, cross-border issues will include things like legal issues. They will include taxation issues. They will include audit and accounting and financial reporting issues. And I think that it's important to not over-micro-focus on any one key point, but rather to look holistically at the basket of key pain points that are, at this point, acting as bottlenecks for the industry to grow and develop all over the world. So in terms of, taxation, I would say, I think we need to look at a broader view of what it is that we're trying to build, how we're trying to shape and better the world, and in what way the industry can contribute to that, and we can advance a broader level of prosperity. You need me to cut it off? Okay. So this has been fun. Well, I'd just like to thank everybody at the Government Blockchain Association. Again, we are firmly committed to the public interest, and we believe in a strong degree of dialogue and support between public and private sector. For those who are watching in foreign jurisdictions and are finding themselves with a blank sheet of paper as to how to go about, designing a system that works for your people and also works for industry, please feel free to join the GBA and to participate in the GBA/Global DCA working group. We welcome you, and we again look forward to engaging. Thank you all very much for your time.